program, 100 Days In, Policy Changes, Workforce Impact, and How HR Can Respond. To lead our presentation, it's a pleasure to introduce Emily M. Dickens. As a member of the executive team for the world's largest human resources trade association and the fourth largest trade association in the world, Emily M. Dickens leads SHRM's efforts across multiple critical areas of strategic and operational importance. In addition to guiding SHRM's advocacy and policy initiatives, she oversees government affairs, global policy, legal affairs, and the SHRM Foundation. Emily plays a pivotal role in aligning these functions to advance SHRM's mission of creating better workplaces for a better world while driving organizational effectiveness and impact. And I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Larry Bucshon, who is a senior policy advisor and lobbyist in Holland & Knight's Washington, D.C. office, and a member of the firm's Public Policy and Regulation Group. Dr. Bucshon focuses his practice on matters related to healthcare and energy. He served in Congress from 2011 to 2025. Since his election to Congress in 2010, Dr. Bucshon has advocated for patient-centered healthcare reforms that support innovation and gives patients access to high-quality, affordable, and timely care, while also ensuring that patients and their doctors have the freedom to make their own healthcare decisions. And finally, Susan Wild is a former U.S. Congresswoman from 2018 to 2025, known for her sharp strategic thinking, deep commitment to people, and unparalleled ability to connect individuals, ideas, and opportunities. Representing Pennsylvania's 7th Congressional District, Susan built a reputation as a pragmatic and results-driven leader, navigating complex policy landscapes. During her time in Congress, Susan successfully passed bipartisan legislation aimed at improving access to health care, including mental health care, as well as educational opportunities. I'm pleased to turn the microphone over to Emily Dickens.
Thanks, Vashonda. And I want to thank all of you for your patience. We all know as much as we engage with technology that anything can happen at any time. And it was really important for us to have both members on this call because, as you all know, we're policy, not politics, and we love making sure that we've got someone from both sides of the aisle. So I want to thank our two guests this morning for engaging with us. And look, I'm going to get started by first saying welcome to the 5,600 of you who are online. That is amazing. Your time is important. And though they've written this really long intro, here's my synopsis of it. First 100 days of any new administration has tons of change. And what makes this first 100 days different from the prior ones that we have experienced in recent years is the whirlwind of executive orders. We've seen in this first 100 days a record-breaking 124 effective orders. And sadly, in this 100 days, we've only seen 5 pieces of legislation make its way through Congress and to the president's desk. And I think that's critical for us when we think about the 3 branches of government and how we need all to be effectively working. And when one isn't working, the other branch seems to have to pull the weight and want to try to solve problems that normally would not be within their area. So that's one piece of it. And just for those who want to make sure that we're correct, President Biden had 42 executive orders by this time in 2021, and President Obama had 40 by this time in 2009. So I want to make sure we have that data. So what are the issues that we've seen that our HR professionals, CHROs, and CEOs have said to us that they're focused on for this second term? Well, let's talk about it. They've said navigating the regulatory changes under the new administration. And for those of you who may recall, under the last administration, we knew there would be tons of regulatory changes, and there were. So someone's going to figure out how to either undo some of those or how to deregulate more. So that's one issue. Inclusion and diversity, we've talked about this ad nauseum, and so I think that's critical as well. And we're going to continue to talk about it because it is impacting our workplaces on a day-to-day basis, and critically important that we figure out a way to embrace the diversity of our country within our workplaces. So inclusion is so important. Displacement related to AI is another issue that we've heard about. We've heard you, we've heard your questions. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. Closing workforce participation gaps. You all are posting roles, even as we see a decline and some jobs being reductions in forces. We're seeing some of that. We do know that there are still hundreds and thousands of jobs where we need people and we don't have them. And we also know that there are Americans who have dropped out of the workforce. Why is that? And what can we do to get them back in? And last, enhancing workplace flexibility. I just did some media this morning on caregiving responsibilities, and it's only going to grow the number of people, 53 million right now, who are working every day, but who are also caregivers. And so needing workplace flexibility is going to be important. So I say all of this represents opportunities as well as challenges, and often we focus so much on the challenges. I want us to spend some time talking about the opportunities today, and I also want to know what you're interested in. So I've asked the team to put together a quick poll, if you don't mind. I want you to be engaged here, and as we put the poll up, the first question we're going to ask you to answer with this poll is, what workplace policy issues have you been paying the most attention to? What are you concerned about? The rise of AI and its impact on hiring, immigration policy changes, the shift towards skills-based hiring, increasing regulatory complexity and compliance challenges, or the influence of America First policies on our domestic workforce development and employer flexibility. Be interested to see what you're interested in, because I want to make sure that we talk about that topic here today. So go ahead, please, and complete the survey. All righty. And while that's going on, I want to ask the first question to our two members, and I'm always looking for commonality. So the great thing is they both served, their tenures overlapped. So we know they had an opportunity to work together. And also, both of them had an opportunity to serve on a committee, which is very important to SHRM, which is the House Committee on Education and the Workforce. And so a number of the issues that we deal with, these two individuals actually had a hand in the policy over an extended period of time, if you think about their terms in Congress. So two, our guests are former members of Congress. My first question is, what are you watching? What is the thing that you've been most watching that impacts workplaces that you'd like to talk about? And Dr. Bouchard?
Well, yeah, first of all, thanks for having me on. This is a great forum, and it's good to be with Susan. I think you outlined some of those, but there's honestly so many things going on with executive orders that it's a challenge to keep up. But I would say some of the biggest things, and you mentioned it, the change in DEI policies, and how employers are now navigating the new regulatory climate as it relates to their companies. And that I think people are concerned about where we're going with federal grants. A lot of the grants across the economy are being looked at, and some are being retracted, and people are finding challenges in making sure that even grants that they've already been approved for, that they get the funding. So I've been following that. Obviously here in Washington, D.C., as it relates to the federal workforce surrounding the Washington, D.C. area, but honestly nationally, and where that goes and the consolidation in agencies and what direction that takes. And that can directly impact your business, because then if certain people are not at agencies or they've been reassigned, who do you call when you have a struggle with the federal government? That's all in flux. And the last thing I'll say is, I think obviously, as it relates particularly agriculture and other things, where we're going on immigration policy. And if we can finally, I would hope, do some restructuring of the legal immigration system so that we can bring people here and that want to stay. Let me give you one example of that, and then I'll pass this to Susan. Raja Krishnamurthy and I, a congressman from the Chicagoland area, worked together on visas, the work-related visas that expire every year at the end of the fiscal year. And believe it or not, if there's country caps, say for in medicine from physicians from India, those just expire, and we don't allocate them to people that are on the cap list. And so one year during COVID, something like 50,000 work-related visas just expired. So we need to fix these things, and I think I'm hopeful that we will do that. So Congress, to your point, needs to step up and get involved in the game, and I'm hopeful that they will, and we will see.
All righty. Congresswoman Wilds, thank you for joining us. We're excited to hear from you. What are you watching?
Well, thank you so much, Emily. Thank you for having me. Larry, it's good to see you again. And as I was listening to you speak, I was in a way wishing we were both still there so that we could work on these issues together, because I really do believe there's tremendous potential for that to happen. But unfortunately, as we all know, we're seeing a very divided Congress and a lot of challenges, and it's very hard. I represented a district where it was expected that you would work on a bipartisan basis. And it's very hard to do that these days, let's face it, from both sides of the aisle. I concur in everything that Larry said a minute ago, and I would add to that what I hear the most, and always did hear the most from businesses and industries, was how difficult lack of predictability was. And what is happening right now makes it so hard for big industries, big business, employers, small and large, to plan ahead. And, so many employers over the years told me, we can face almost any challenge that you present us with, but what we can't face is lack of predictability. Because think about it, they budget and they plan and they do their development and that kind of thing, way in advance. And if you don't know what's coming next, how do you do that kind of planning? That, of course, is going to very much affect workforce, because if you don't know what you're planning for, it is very hard to either hire or retain. I'll just use tariffs as an example, the unpredictability around tariffs and having them imposed and then perhaps lifted and, but maybe to be reinstated. How does an employer or an industry really react in any kind of real time to that kind of thing? And that is really what troubles me the most. And frankly, even if we had a very bipartisan acting Congress, the administration is making it very, very difficult for them to get anything done along those lines. I'm going to stop there, but I will say I'd like to come back to educational grants at some point. And I made a note to myself, and I will. But I wanted to pass the floor at this time.
Well, you know what, Congresswoman Wilds, I got on the team today and I said, education is not there. You're not going to hear about that. But I think that is important. We have a number of members who are in higher education, but we also know those grants create jobs in our communities. And so that's important. But we also talk about workforce development, the education to employment pipeline. So how do you think this lack of investment by the federal government in grants is going to ultimately impact our future workers? And that's the talent pool that we're trying to pull from to fill these needed these vacancies in our organizations.
Absolutely. And that's been one of my greatest concerns. During the time I was in Congress, I was able to steer an awful lot of federal resources to our 2 community colleges. Pennsylvania 7 has 2 of Pennsylvania's 14 community colleges. And a lot of those grants literally went to meeting the needs of local employers and manufacturers who would partner with these community colleges and say, I'll give you an example, the utility company PPL, Pennsylvania Power and Light. They went to Northampton Community College and said, what we really need are more linemen. I guess it's line people. And Northampton Community, this was a few years ago, Northampton Community College literally devised a program. And when you go, there are electric poles behind the school, and they train people to be linemen at this facility, and those people go directly into jobs at PPL. So number one, it was good for PPL. Number 2, it was great for the students who then went on to careers. Another example, Lehigh Carbon Community College, which is the other community college in my district, responded to needs both by Amazon, which has warehouses and literally sent their trainees from around the country to Lehigh to train for working at Amazon. And they also met the needs of the trucking industry for CDL drivers, and particularly developed a CDL program. And this was it was directly facilitated under the Biden administration by a grant for exactly that. And it actually enabled veterans to get their CDLs. not having those grants is going to mean that these community colleges are less likely, or it's going to be impossible for them to develop these kind of programs. It's going to hurt our manufacturers, our employers, and of course, our future employees.
What a great point. And also it does tie into the fact, I know you talked about some large companies, but I know many of our small and mid-sized companies really depend on access to this new talent that is coming through here. And so it's not often talked about because we're thinking, oh, federal grants, but it is going to impact our access to talent. And I think that is really critical to talk about. You also talked about skills. And skills, that was one of the items that came up in our poll. Skills, that's a big deal. We're saying now we have to focus more on skills, and we should. We're not saying that people shouldn't go to college. They shouldn't go to community college. We also think that we can more easily get people into the workplace if we're focusing on their skills. And Congressman Bucshon, I know you were on Ed and Labor as well. Yep. And you know about this issue. Can you talk a little bit about this? Healthcare tends to be one of those industries where skills is an issue, and what you're seeing and what your concerns may be as well.
Yeah, I think you have to look at this from a historical perspective, and the push really starting back maybe even 40, 50 years ago, to get a 4-year college degree, so to speak. And there's there's obviously nothing wrong with that. I ended up being in medical school. But also, our economy started to transition away from what I'll call a manufacturing society economy to more of a service economy over time, right? So you started to see loss of these type of skills because there was no demand for the job. And then you had see education starting really in grade school and through high school start to eliminate things like shop class and, where people did hands-on things, or automobile mechanic class, or whatever you want to talk about. So we started to gravitate away from that historically, and now it's caught up to us because now we're trying to create people that have skills. And you mentioned healthcare. We encouraged people to go one direction, and now I think we're shifting back. Indiana has focused on, and I represented Indiana, has focused on getting information to grade school kids, really, and high school kids for sure, about the possible job opportunities out there. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. Go ask a high school kid, hey, do you want to be a radiology tech at a hospital? They're like, well, what's that? So I think that's our challenge, right? I think we're getting there. And Indiana has focused on it, and on the Education and Workforce Committee, or Education and Labor Committee, I think everyone wanted to help with that. But I think it starts young. I think you have to start educating students at a young age to get them to understand what their opportunities are out there. And the best opportunity may not for you to be to go to a 4-year school. It may be going to a trade school. And there's a lot of opportunity there. So I think, it took a long time to get here. I think it's going to take some time to reverse that. Again, we need to get back, I think, more of our manufacturing capacity and get more, a little bit more away from just a service economy only. And that will help because it will create new opportunities.
Can I add something there, Emily, if you don't mind? And those are such important points. And Larry, I'm happy to hear that Indiana's focusing on grade school students. For a long time, everything about education, from K to 12 was focused on going to college. And what we learned over the long term is that, number one, a lot of college degrees don't prepare people for today's work reality. It also doesn't recognize the importance of manufacturing. And of course, with a made in the USA attitude and mentality, which I think we all have, we've got to have those workers too. But there's always been this focus, I think, on a 4-year college out of high school, almost out of some sense of shame over vocational or technical education. And so it's not only about going to the students, it's also about getting to the parents and guidance counselors. And look, 4-year college and graduate school is wonderful for a lot of people, but it's not for everybody. I have two kids. They're not kids anymore. They're 29 and 32, but I remember lots of kids sitting around my living room over, Saturday nights, and they'd all be talking about where they were going to go to school. And there were some kids that I knew from both their aptitude and their interest were not really going to be successful in their college education. And some of them I know now, they quit after 2 years, not at a community college, a 4-year school. So they didn't have a degree, and they did have student loan debt. And ironically, a couple of them now are working at Amazon locally. And I'm thinking, wouldn't it have been nice if they had been directed in another field, earlier in life? So I think that we've really got to get into those schools, but we also have to address whether it's PTOs, associations of guidance counselors, like we're now addressing human resources professionals. Just really make sure that people are understanding that manufacturing and technology skills are really exciting, not something to look down on.
That's a valid point, and I would say HR professionals are a little bit ahead of the game here. We've been talking for some time about even job descriptions requiring people have degrees, and you don't necessarily need it in the job description. And so we're seeing that removal, and as a result, we just had some data yesterday that showed that more people are being placed now because of the lesser focus on the degree requirement. So we're excited to hear that. I want to pivot to what you all told us. And my team owes me some money because I knew this was going to be the number one thing you were going to be concerned about, the increasing regulatory complexity. And it's interesting how Congressman Wiles talked about the fact that everything is unpredictable. And because of the unpredictability of much of what we've been working on in the regulatory environment over the last 4 years and where it stands, I think that is important for us to talk about now, and obviously we do too. So we've got a list of some of the pieces of some of the regulations that we've been working on. The overtime rule, you might recall that came up during the last administration. The independent contractor rule, the non-compete ban, the updated harassment guidance coming through EEOC, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act as well, and then, of course, the employment-based immigration updates to H-1B. So are there any of those that resonate with you all that you're watching and thinking of what you think the current administration is going to move on first? I know some of this is tied up in litigation, but I think that we're going to see, when we know we're going to see a move toward deregulation. We heard no new regulations. For every new one, you must cancel 10. So we've heard that, and I think some HR professionals can be there to get rid of some of the complex issues we're dealing with. But Congressman Bucshon, would you like to share which one of these you have the most interest in and what you've been watching?
Well, I think, all of them. I think, regulation, and I think Congresswoman Wild mentioned this, is that, companies, large and small, want certainty. And I think right now, I'm not sure where that direction goes. Look, my dad was a United Mine Worker. He's a union coal miner, right? And so there's a lot of things that you discussed are very important. If people are being required, because of short staffing to work overtime, then they need to be fairly compensated for that, either with time off or financially. That's an issue I think that we need to pay attention to, because if you talk to people out there, a lot of people are kind of worn out. They're ones that have jobs when they're short staffing and other things. So, I think it takes a little bit of the sting out of it if you can get some time off related to that, or you can be fairly compensated for your overtime work. And, I think there's been a long-term focus on job retraining. I've seen a lot of, we talked about that a little bit, where people are in current jobs. And I think one thing that is important is that with the AI, and I know you're going to talk about that and other things, that the HR professionals and the companies and the workforce need to be proactive in helping their employees kind of see around the corner and see the future, and making sure they're properly trained. All of those things I'm following. I think for me, certainty in the regulatory climate is very important. And right now, obviously there's a lot of uncertainty. I mean, there's a lot more to unpack here, but I mean, in the interest of time, I'll stop.
So before I get to Congressman Wilds, let's put up our second poll question. I want to know which of these are the one you're most concerned about in your workplace. Not only is this going to help us here in this discussion, but as SHRM continues to advocate related to these issues, we want to make sure that we're hearing and leveraging your voice there. So as people are voting on the poll, Congressman Wilds, talk to me about which of these you've had the most concern about, most engaged with, and what we should be looking for.
You mean on the last poll, the first poll?
Yes.
So I would agree with Larry about the skills training and so forth. Immigration, I think, would have to be my second one. It's so frustrating to me that in 6+ years in Congress, the number one thing that I heard from HR professionals, like the people who are watching this webinar, was the shortage of workers, not just qualifications and skills, but literally bodies that they could bring in, and they were willing to train, do on-the-job training. But there was just a shortage of people. And the frustrating part for me was that, and now as a political matter, immigration is like this hot button word. So you can barely utter the word as a politician without being attacked from one direction or another, when in reality, people like Larry and I and other members across the aisle in Congress should be working on things like those work visas that he mentioned before, that he worked on with Raj, and other things that make it possible for people to legally come here to work and with whatever strictures and vetting that we need. But that, I mean, and Larry, when you talked about the work visas expiring, I was thinking, and then to get it either renewed or for somebody to get a new one is such a lengthy process that it's not helping them, and it's certainly not helping the employers. And I just don't know. And honestly, I think to get immigration or to get politics out of this subject, voters and non-politicians are going to have to demand that politicians talk about immigration on a bipartisan basis and solve this problem.
Can I add one thing real quick? Can I add something real quickly too about that I meant to say about this independent contractor situation? You know, this affects people all the way from across the workforce, including professionals. And you know, we do need to address that situation where people are being employed as 1099 employees and not W-2 employees. Therefore, they get stuck with, you know, they get stuck with all the taxes, even though their legal status technically is really a W-2 employee. And I think we need to, you know, that's in part of your survey there. But for me, I've had direct experience with this situation, and we need to address it. People shouldn't be considered contractors when they're working for one company and then getting 1099s and then getting stuck with all these self-employment taxes. There's a big problem there, and we need to address that.
You know, the contractor, and I'm going to put a pin in the immigration piece because I do want us to come back to that, but we're still waiting on the poll to come up to tell us what was the number one thing you wanted to talk about as it related to regulatory actions. So I encourage you all to finish the poll. But I do want to talk about that. That was one of the things that, looks like we've got it. Department of Labor overtime rule and Equal Employment Opportunity Commission are our top two. So we were talking about the independent contractor rule, and I do want to say that was something that SHRM advocated for more clarity and less complexity on the overtime rule, because part of it is our small and mid-sized businesses are really trying to work hard to have access to the talent they need to provide flexibility and maybe not bring in that talent on their payroll the entire time. And so what we need to see across the board is the flexibility, especially for our small and mid-sized companies that need to access talent at certain periods of time, but not hold the 100% responsibility for that employee, because it's more than your base salary. As you all know, it is all the other pieces of that compensation package. And so that we've seen that, and we were concerned and continue to be concerned about it. We think that there's an opportunity for our voices to be heard on this, again, to take away some of the complexity and to really hear from our everyday business owners and those that work with them about how they leverage that 1099 employee, that contractor who is independently doing their work. And we know that we've seen what that piece of legislation could look like when it works for our organization. So I think that's one place to go. So on
Yeah,
here, the overtime.
can I just clarify then? What I was talking about is where people are actually full-time employed at a company and they're not contractors, but they're full-time employed, but they're still getting a 1099. Of course, companies have to have access to independent contractors that are legitimately people that are employed as a contractor. And of course, those are 1099 employees from a company perspective. I was talking about where people are being employed full-time at one company and then being considered a contractor when they're really not, and they end up paying all the other things that a W-2 employee doesn't. So I wanted to clarify that.
That is helpful. And look, we know this, again, complex. We talk about the complexity of regulations, why I think it's good to spend some time on this. So the overtime rule was the number one thing. And I tell you, I remember this coming up over a decade ago, actually in the higher education space, where we were worried about how does that look? But I know so many organizations that were prepared to execute on what the new rules were. And now it looks like everything is going to be at a standstill. And again, I think that lends to the unpredictability of what we're seeing here. I can assure you that's one of the things we're going to be advocating for on our members' behalf is, again, some certainty as we look at rules like this. Did either of you want to comment at all on the overtime rule? Because I think earlier, Dr. Bashan, you were right that if people are working the hours, they need to be compensated. But with this overtime rule, there is no certainty on who is eligible and when. And it seems that we're changing it every few years and trying to bring some certainty for planning and budgeting purposes. Human resources is the largest item on the budget, on the line, it's the largest line item. And so being able to plan going forward without this overtime rule showing itself in the many forms that we've seen it, I think is one of the largest concerns. And I was right about that. Congresswoman Wilds, anything to add there?
I would only say that, again, the lack of certainty, and the overtime rule, but then there are so many exemptions to the overtime rule, but how they are classified and how, especially if you're in a smaller business, how you are supposed to determine whether this employee is exempt or non-exempt, there's such lack of clarity that I think it's very, very frustrating. Quite frankly, it probably leads to a number of violations of the overtime rule that are unintentional. So,
agreed.
Again, we need more consistency and clarity.
So I know you all are going to keep hearing those words: consistency, clarity, predictability, and we want to give you some hope here. I think here is an opportunity, your voice and your advocacy in these areas, because as I understand it, the administration has been reaching out and asking people, which regulations would you like to see overturned? Because with a rule that says for every new one, we must get rid of 10, it'll be interesting to see what actually gets taken off the board and where we can use our voices and influence changes that actually will help our workplaces and our workers. So I think in this environment that there is a lot of opportunity on the regulatory front, and we'll continue to watch that on the SHRM Government Affairs team. So I do want to pivot here back to immigration if I can, because I know that's another issue that was in our original poll as something that is of concern. We've had a couple of sessions here, webcasts, talking about I-9s and workplace and ICE in workplaces. And I know this continues to be a problem that we talk a lot about. If Congress, and so if you're in Congress right now, and here's an opportunity for Congress to act, or at least to do something as it relates to workplace immigration only, because I think part of the issue is that immigration is much bigger than just one thing. It's more than what we see at our borders. A lot of it is impacted by what we see in our workplaces because we don't have enough talent to pull from in this country. Do you see an opportunity, if there were a focus on just workplace immigration issues, of us all bringing both sides to the table and getting something across the president's desk? Or are we looking at another 4, 5, 6 years before anyone wants to even talk about this?
Well,
so can I go ahead? I'm sorry, Larry. No, you go.
No, go ahead, Susan.
I just wanted to say, For the longest time, I was working with my local chamber of commerce to get them to publicly make a statement, because of course the Chamber of Commerce is, certainly a business representative organization, that they wanted members of Congress on both sides to work on a workplace immigration bill so that politicians like us would literally feel some sort of approval and wouldn't be subject to political attack if we were working on such a bill. And I just think it's critical to get buy-in from employers' organizations before we will ever make any meaningful progress on this.
That's interesting. That's a Virginia Fox move. Put it right back in our laps here and say, look, you all got to do something about this. Dr. Vachon, what do you think?
Well, I totally agree with Susan on that issue. I think it's going to ultimately take constituents, whether that's whether that's the workers or the companies or the corporations or whatever, to help lean in, because members of Congress, react to their constituents. And right now, it's a very unfortunate situation. I think there's so much opportunity in the immigration space. I mentioned myself and Raja working together on just expiring visas, but I represented an agricultural district that had, seasonal workers that came legally every year. And the agricultural industry is dependent on that, and they need more people. And they need more, and there's a lot of people that want to come and work legally in the U.S. and many of them go back home, in my experience. But we get caught up in the issue related to the things that the border and the illegal immigration system, and unfortunately, it leaves a lot of opportunity on the table where we can fix some of these legal barriers. I mean, the country cap situation, where look. I'm not saying up or down on that policy, but does it make sense if you have work-related visas that at the end of the fiscal year, 50,000 of them just go away, and you don't say, look, we got all these people, most of them professionals on this country cap waiting list. Why don't we allocate those, to the people off that list and get the list improved? Well, simple things like that we can't accomplish, but I think there's a lot of opportunity there, but it is going to take outside pressure from constituents, so to speak, to get Congress to act.
Well, my shout out right now is to the SHRM A team. It's our advocacy team, and I'm going to ask them to leverage their voices because their stories are the ones that resonate with their members of Congress. Hearing about the impact in their own backyard is so important. And so I think that's a challenge we can try to accept as we continue to push for discussions about this critical issue because it impacts workforce participation. Now, out of the same breath, we're also talking about AI and displacement. So on one arm, we're trying to fill some roles we need filled today. On the other side, we're acknowledging that we are going to lose some jobs because of the use of artificial intelligence. And as you all know, at the end of the last Congress, the Bipartisan House Task Force on Artificial Intelligence released a final report that emphasized the need for substantial investment in upskilling and reskilling programs to prepare workers for AI integrated roles. It said within the next 3 years, 40% of the U.S. workforce will require new skills. And I don't know if you know this, but at SHRM, we say AI plus HI equals ROI. We believe that AI won't replace your job necessarily, but a person with the skills and the knowledge of how to use AI could be the person that replaces you in your job. And so there is some acknowledgments there. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on what side you're on, there was an executive order that rescinded standards for AI safety, civil rights protections, and workforce displacement planning. So at this point, how can members of Congress help employers and workers leverage AI? Is there any way? I know they're not scientists or experts, but I do know a few of them who went back to school to learn a little bit more about AI, including Don Beyer, who was represents the district where SHRM's HQ is located. So we know that we have seen people try to get more training on that. But if you're sitting there in Congress today, what are some of the things you think and options they have to try to help employers as they navigate AI and its impact?
Well, I mean, Congress is working on, the regulatory framework around AI, and that is a difficult challenge. I think what needs to happen is Congress needs to address this on behalf of the American people and come up with thoughtful ideas to both protect people from the challenges that we know AI creates online, help people get reskilled. So they, again, like you say, AI creates a challenge, yes, but it may create some opportunities. Healthcare is a big space, for example, in that. What do we do? And I'll use the radiology profession as are we going to have all of our X-rays read just by AI, or are we not? Well, we have challenges there, and we have to have some sort of regulatory framework around quality, around safety, around liability, and all those things, just in that one space, right? And so it's a big challenge, but I think rather than having the executive branch, from a legislative branch perspective, do executive orders or other rules and regulations, I'm hopeful Congress will step up in a bipartisan way and help. I think AI creates opportunity if you embrace it, but we have to do something around safety online and other things, and we just have to do that. And I know Congress is kind of in a standstill on this right now.
Congresswoman Wilds, anything to add?
I just want to say that this is not the first time in my lifetime that we have faced this kind of workplace challenge. If you recall, not that long ago, the big subject was automation, and you had workers and labor unions decrying automation and saying people are going to lose their jobs. And of course, we've seen this already with AI, where many people are contending that, including, actors and writers and the Screenwriters Guild and people like that. But the reality is automation has ultimately resulted in greater efficiencies and new kinds of jobs for workers, that are now dealing with. And by the way, I have a very heavy duty manufacturing district, and it wasn't until I was in Congress and started visiting all these manufacturers that I really became a huge fan of manufacturing, because I realized the old image of manufacturing as being like, a dirty factory floor is no longer. I mean, in fact, they're as clean as a whistle for the most part because of so much of the high tech equipment they have that has to be kept very sterile and clean and all that. But all of that results in new jobs. And quite frankly, a lot of those jobs are ideally suited for younger people who are growing up in an age of AI, of computer skills, whereas people of mine and Larry's vintage, have actually had to learn some things along the way. But there is no reason that the older workers should be left out of it either. But it comes back to employers can't do this all on their own. They need to be able to transition to AI with the help of the federal government, with the help of state governments. It does require some expenditure of resources, which is almost a dirty thought in today's administration. But I just think that it's vital that we modernize and grow with the it's almost like saying, and this will resonate with Dr. Bouchon, imagine if in medicine we avoided medical advances, the new things that are learned, and medical technology and new equipment and all of that, and just said, you know what, that might put our medical professionals out of work, and it's going to be a standstill, and we're just going to stay with whatever medicine was good in the 1940s. Well, of course we don't do that. And we've recognized, how important those medical advances are. Well, it's the same kind of concept, and it grows our economy. And I just really hope that we can get behind it. And I'm somebody who, quite frankly, the first time I heard AI, I was like, boy, I hope I can get to the end of my career without learning about AI. And then I found out, well, AI is really something I've actually already been using. I just never called it AI. So
I said the same thing to someone, never heard of Grammarly, and I think we're using autocorrect. And I appreciate the the comparison to automation. I too had opportunity to view some factories lately, and it absolutely looks nothing like the factories of yesterday. And even I'm the child of a mechanic. And so I know today my father would definitely not be able to get under the hood of any car because unless it was older than 20 years old, because we know things have changed. It's a different type of skill set, but you still do need someone to fix our cars just differently. And we like to say, now I do want to quickly, because I know we're down to about 3 minutes though, is we talked a little bit about healthcare being one of those industries that's a great example of the opportunities and where there could be some displacement. And I promise you, Dr. Bucshon, we've not been in your head, but we often use that radiology example of someone who now, with the help and assistance of AI, can look at more x-rays per day, decreasing the number of radiologists we need. But guess what we need more of? Caregivers. And that is a growing economy that we need a recognition of the value of the work provided there. So we absolutely need those workers to be paid more because they're taking care of one of our best resources, our older Americans, our young children or family members who have issues as well. And so we think that there's another side where there is going to be some compression, that there will be growth as well. And we all need to be thinking bigger picture there. With 2 minutes left, I'm going to ask Rashonda whether there are any questions from the audience that we could take in this time period. And I know I can talk about these first 100 days for 2 and 3 hours, but I know many of you have to either return to your first hour of work on the West Coast or it's the end of your lunch break on the East Coast. And so, Rashonda, do we have any questions? And it looks like, wow, we're up to about 14,000 eyeballs on this. Thank you. Thank you all so much for your support of this. Rashonda? There we go. I see one. With so many executive orders and rapid policy shifts coming from the administration, what can HR professionals do to stay prepared and responsive, especially when these changes impact compliance, reporting, or employee rights almost overnight? So I'm going to try that first, and then I'll ask you all. And look, I'll just say this is a lot. The first thing I'm going to tell you is to breathe. You will not have all the answers. And so look for trusted advisors and resources like SHRM and others who can get you through this. I know you all have general counsels, benefits counsel. They all send out lots of material. Your reading material is going to have to change from maybe some of the things we really like to read to some of the things we have to read in the short term, but don't get overwhelmed. Find the 1, 2, or 3 things that are most important right now to your organization and get laser focused there with the help of your trusted advisors. Dr. Bucshon, any recommendations to our HR professionals who really are feeling a little bit overwhelmed right now, what I call the whiplash of our EOs right now?
Well, I mean, I think taking a deep breath that you advise is the right thing to do. I think you're going to see over the next probably year, right, that it's going to settle out, and the certainty we've been talking about will improve. So I would say the best thing to do now is follow things along, but recognize you're still in a fluid situation, but things will slowly be clarified with time over probably the next year, I would say, and maybe into early part of next year.
Absolutely.
Can I just add something that's more immediate? And that is lean into your community, of which SHRM is one. So it's a lot easier to take advantage of collective knowledge. So if you go out and try to learn all of the EOs, executive orders, and what the impact is on your business on your own, it's going to be a full-time job. Okay. But if you belong to an association, or if you belong to SHRM, or if you're a member of the chamber, lean into things like this webinar, but it could be a webinar that is specific to EOs or certain EOs that matter to your industry, and take advantage of that. Don't try to figure it all out on your own.
Well, I couldn't have asked for a better commercial, so thank you very much. I did not plant that with her. And I know we're short on time. I know one of our resources is SHRM Connect, and I hear so much from our team, our membership team, about how you all leverage the relationships in SHRM Connect so that you're able to ask questions of your colleagues who are in the same industries, who have the same number of employees, who are dealing with the same issues. And so I think that's important. So I know we're in overtime, but I know that there's one last last question, and we started a little late, and so I do want to make sure we got to this question. With all the talk about the future of work, what are some practical steps smaller HR teams can take today to prepare for what's ahead, especially around tech and talent development? And I'll just say one example here is don't run away from learning and practicing AI. It is every day. It is one of those, it's like a newborn baby that gets a little more knowledge each day. And so it's changing and growing, and you've got to change and grow with it. Encourage your leaders in your organizations, your teams to play. And we did this a couple of years ago to make sure that they're playing and using AI at home, at work, even fund that. There's some monthly costs sometimes. So I think that investment in getting your workforce up to speed on how to use and leverage technology like AI for your needs is something that's important. I want to thank our two former members of Congress who I really appreciate. They both are busy right now, but I so appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to talk to us about some critical issues in the first 100 days. Your SHRM team is going to continue to monitor all of these issues. We've got a 100-day tracker on our website, as well as other content that'll be available to you. I wish you all an amazing afternoon, and thank you again.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.